Evening, folks. Welcome to the Chris Salcedo Show worldwide here on the Vida television network. I am your host, Chris Salcedo. I am a liberty-loving Latino. Don't confuse me with loudmouth leftist Latinos out there. I actually love my country, the United States of America. If you want to get in touch with the show, it's really easy to do. Just go to chrissalcedo.com, ChrisSalcedo.com. On Twitter, instantaneous access at Chris Salcedo TX, at ChrisSalcedoTX. Going to do something a little different, haven't done before. I'm going to dedicate the first part of the program to one guy. Well, one guy who, I got to say, is emblematic of a broader problem here in the United States. That guy is Jeff Flake. He's a United States Senator from Arizona, at least for the time being. He's decided, you see, not to run for re-election. Now, something you got to know about Mr. Flake. He's a squish. He's a moderate. He doesn't believe in fighting against radicalized liberals, denying us liberty, denying us our freedoms. He would just rather go along to get along and make sure his family is protected. Yours, not so much. So Mr. Jeff Flake stepped up onto the Senate floor to announce that he wasn't going to seek re-election, and he was blaming Donald J. Trump for that because Donald J. Trump is just so mean, and Donald J. Trump he just speaks so nasty. The truth of the matter is, folks, is that folks in Arizona are on to Jeff Flake. He campaigns as a conservative, but governs as a liberal. And the people in Arizona were not going to re-elect him. He was actually up against an actual conservative. Her name is Kelly Ward, and he was not polling above 18%. So like Bob Corker, instead of standing for and then enduring a humiliating defeat, he just dropped out. Look for Jeff Flake to run as a Democrat sometime in the near future with the excuse, I didn't leave the party left me. Well, to Mr. Flake, I would remind him that the Republican Party, the planks are conservative. And this guy, along with several of his compatriots, the aforementioned Bob Corker, John McCain, Shelley Moore Capito, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, they've all abandoned conservatism. But I wanted to examine part of the speech he made and actually pick it apart. Here is Jeff Flake last week on the floor of the United States Senate, decrying Donald Trump and blaming him for him not seeking re-election.
At a moment when it seems that our democracy is more defined by our discord and our dysfunction than by our own values and principles, let me begin by noting a somewhat obvious point, that these offices that we hold are not ours indefinitely. We're not here simply to mark time. Sustained incumbency is certainly not the point of seeking office, and there are times when we must risk our careers in favor of our principles.
Yeah. The principles he spoke of, they were on hiatus for the last 8 years, at least his professed principles. He claimed to be a Republican, claimed to be a conservative, but the last 8 years, Mr. Flake didn't take to the Senate floor to say he wasn't going to seek re-election because our politics had descended into the gutter. Don't forget, during the last 8 years of Barack Obama, people like me, your liberty-loving Latino, were called anarchists, arsonists, terrorists with bombs strapped to our chests, racists, extremists, all by Democrats, even by the former occupier of the Oval Office, Barack Obama. Did Jeff Flake take to the Senate floor to decry how coarse our politics had gotten? Of course not. He reserved that for 10 months of Donald Trump. Mr. Flake continued.
President Roosevelt continued to announce that there must be no criticism of the president, or that we are to stand by a president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but is morally treasonable to the American public, unquote. Acting on conscience and principle in a manner is the manner in which we express our moral selves, and as such, loyalty to conscience and principle should supersede loyalty to any man or party.
Mr. Flake neglected to understand this when Barack Obama was running Washington, running it into the ground, by the way, running the country into the ground. By the way, the Internal Revenue Service just last week settled with the Tea Party folks that they had illegally targeted because of their ideology, because of their political beliefs. Where was Jeff Flake talking about his vaunted principles? Truth of the matter is, folks, that Jeff Flake here, an alleged Republican, had more in common with Barack Obama than he does with the conservatives. That's why he didn't step out onto the Senate floor to decry President Obama. But he does so now with a man who's trying to fix everything that Barack Obama broke.
We can all be forgiven for failing in that measure from time to time. I certainly put myself at the top of the list of those who fall short in this regard. I am holier than none. But too often we rush to salvage principle, not to salvage principle, but to forgive and excuse our failures so that we might accommodate them and go right on failing until the accommodation itself becomes our principle.
You understand what he's saying? He's saying that accommodating Donald Trump and excusing Donald Trump for all of his frank talk, for standing up for common sense conservatism, common sense Americanism, that Mr. Trump's style just rubs him the wrong way, and he can't stand up for that. And he is wagging his finger at other Republicans who say, well, that's just Donald Trump's style. I don't disagree with his policies. That may not be my style, but we're going to go along with him anyway because, and I said this before on this program, where Donald Trump's populism meets my conservatism, I'll support him. Jeff Flake can't get there. Jeff Flake is, he's just so crude and he's so crass. Well, he says the accommodation becomes the principle. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that Senator Jeff Flake and those like him, McCain, Murkowski, Collins, others, they accommodated. Their policy of accommodation to Barack Obama harmed this country. This man ought to be ashamed of himself. And the country is better off that he is leaving the United States Senate. He continued, here's another aspect I wanted to address.
American leadership looks to the world and, just as Lincoln did, sees the family of man. Humanity is not a zero-sum game. When we have been at our most prosperous, we have been at our most principled. And when we do well, the rest of the world does well. These articles of civic faith have been critical to the American identity for as long as we have been alive. They are our birthright and our obligation. We must guard them jealously and pass them on for as long as the calendar has days. To betray them or to be unserious in their defense is a betrayal of the fundamental obligations of American leadership. And to behave as if they don't matter is simply not who we are.
This is Jeff Flake defending illegal immigration. This is Jeff Flake saying, in essence, buying into the globalist notion that everybody has a right to come to America. Now, Americans don't have a right to go anyplace else in the world, but everybody has a right to come to America, whether they're terrorists, whether they're here illegally, whether they're criminals from other nations. They have a right to be here, according to Jeff Flake, because that's how we do well here in America. Nothing could be further from the truth, of course. And the fact that America does well when the rest of the world does well, let me offer this to Mr. Flake. The reason why America does well is because we are a nation of laws, sir. Because we are a nation of laws that adhere to those laws. And your party, the leadership of your party, and virtually all of the other party ignoring the rule of law makes us no better than a banana republic, sir. Again, you are a disgrace, Senator Jeff Flake. Now, this next stanza is really perplexing to me. Listen to this.
Now, the efficacy of American leadership around the globe has come into question.
Now? You mean the last 10 months? Now it has? That's an utter lie, an utter falsehood. Countries who are American allies are coming out of the woodwork to say, thank God America is back. Because for the last 8 years, while Jeff Flake sat silently, America was retreating from the world stage on a leadership role. we were leading from behind, according to the previous administration. The fact that Jeff Flake would try to pass this off as something that's a new invention when it's been present for the last 8 years. Problem is here is Jeff Flake didn't vociferously object to the last 8 years. He has culpability, and now he's trying to shove it off onto Donald Trump.
When the United States emerged from World War II, we contributed about half of the world's economic activity. It would have been easy to secure our dominance, keeping those countries who had been defeated or greatly weakened during the war in their place. We didn't do that. It would have been easy to focus inward. We resisted those impulses.
Yeah, this is hearkening back to George W. Bush's speech. Focusing inward, meaning taking care of America, is now somehow taboo, according to the globalists, like George Bush or like John McCain or like Mr. Flake here or like Bob Corker. This is the predicate they're setting up. It's a false predicate, folks, but it's a predicate nonetheless.
Instead, we financed reconstruction of shattered countries and created international organizations and institutions that have helped provide security and foster prosperity around the world for more than 70 years. Now it seems that we, the architects of this visionary, rules-based world order that has brought so much freedom and prosperity, are the ones most eager to abandon it. The implications of this abandonment are profound, and the beneficiaries of this rather radical departure in the American approach to the world are the ideological enemies of our values.
Yes.
Despotism loves a vacuum.
Yes.
And our allies are now.
Sure does. Look, he just described the last 8 years. The rise of radicalized Islamic fundamentalist terrorists, the rise of despots and dictators, even being paid off by the previous administration. Jeff Flake went on, after all of that, to announce he was leaving the United States Senate. And to Jeff Flake, I say, don't let the door hit you where the good Lord splits you. Your silence while Barack Obama abandoned America's role in the world was deafening. I'll be right back. Welcome back to the Chris Salcedo Show worldwide. Glad you've tuned in tonight, folks. Chances are you've heard the expression, remember the Alamo. And the Alamo is not only a symbol of Texas pride, Texas independence, it is actually a symbol for the entire country. And there's a bit of a controversy that's brewing down in the state of Texas surrounding a restoration effort for the Alamo. It's getting up there in years, as you may or may not know. The land commissioner in the state of Texas, his name is George P. Bush. Yes, the nephew of the former president, George W. Bush, grandson of George H.W. Bush, and son of former Florida governor, Jeb Bush. Now, he is in charge of this restoration effort, but there's some controversy brewing down there. We brought on his communications director, Bryan Preston, to talk a little bit about that. Here's how the interview went. And welcome back, everybody. It's Chris Salcedo Show worldwide here on the Vida television network. Pleased to be joined by an old pal of mine. He's a former bigwig with PJ Media. PJ Media, of course, an online content provider. He's a veteran producer in talk radio and the current communications director for the General Land Office under Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush. Yes, related to all those Bushes. Areas, Bryan Preston, everybody. Say hi, Bryan.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me on. How are you?
Doing well, sir. Nice to have you here. Now, look, the reason I had you on the national show here is very simple, is because you guys are dealing with an issue in Texas that everybody across the country is going to be able to relate to. It's this idea of the renovation of the Alamo. Everybody around the country has heard about the Alamo, But even this is controversial. Explain what's going on.
Yeah, well, we're in the early stages of a project to restore and preserve the Alamo, of course, in the heart of San Antonio. And for folks who are familiar with the Alamo, there's the story. There's the 1836 battle, which is one of the key events in Texas history, if not the key event in Texas history. And then there is the physical Alamo itself. That is in the heart of the city of San Antonio, the second largest city in the state of Texas. And we only have two structures that survive from that 1836 battle. And so what we're trying to do is preserve those two structures and then reattach the battlefield of the Alamo to those two structures because they've been separated now for about 100 years. And then just tell the story of 1836 better. We need to take that story and tell it in a really compelling way and tell it so that rising generations and future generations hear it and understand it and appreciate that freedom is not free. So this is a very important project. And as you might imagine, all eyes are on us right now.
Yeah, well, you know what? Not only eyes around San Antonio, where the Alamo is located, of course, but eyes around all of Texas, and even eyes around the country. And this is where the controversy starts coming in. A lot of criticism has been leveled at the General Land Office Commissioner George P. Bush, the nephew of the former president and the son of the former governor of Florida. Because many are, and the allegations are wide and varied, but even the most staunch detractors have now poo-pooed these ideas that it's going to be turned into some sort of Disneyland attraction. That's not going to happen. That there's going to be a name change. That's not going to happen. So we can get rid of all of those criticisms, which have been largely driven by internet rumor. But there are criticisms out there about the transparency of this project, because and here's what they're saying. These folks are saying, look, this is very much a part of Texas history, and we don't want it perverted or distorted or watered down to placate progressive liberal elements. Address those concerns, if you will, and then tell me how much of this is fact and how much of it is fiction.
Well, pretty much everything you're hearing out there is in one way or another fiction, as far as the big stories that have been going on out there. Our accusers came out saying that we were going to change the name, like you mentioned, which would be an absolutely insane thing to do. The Alamo is one of the most recognized names in the world, not just in Texas. And it's been known as the Alamo since 1803. Why would anyone change that name? They've said that we were going to turn it into a Disneyland. And if you've actually been there, it's kind of a Disneyland now, because you have the Ripley's, believe it or not, across the street. You have a Tomb Raider. You have snow cone vendors on the battlefield itself. And that's just because of the way the city has developed around the Alamo. So we're actually taking all of that away. We're going the opposite direction from what our accusers say. As far as transparency goes, we've set up a nonprofit fundraising arm called the Alamo Endowment Board. And actually, we didn't set this up. Our predecessor, who keeps lobbing these ridiculous accusations at us directly, he actually set the Alamo Endowment Board up. And what it is it's a typical endowment like you'll see at the Battleship Texas and the Nimitz Museum, Independence Hall, Gettysburg. What they do is they raise money because we don't want the taxpayers to have to pay all of the bill for everything we're going to do at the Alamo. It's going to be an expensive project because the Alamo is 300 years old. We're going to build the first real proper museum for it. That museum is going to house the Phil Collins collection, which is incredible. And you can't do this for free, and you can't do it on the cheap. But we don't want to put the taxpayers on the hook for all of these expenses. So we have the Alamo Endowment Board that at the right time, they're going to launch a capital fundraising campaign. That capital fundraising campaign is going to raise money to fund at least about half of this project. The whole project may cost around $400 to $450 million, which sounds like a lot, and it is. So we want to raise money from the private sector. We think the private sector has a critical role to play, and that's what we're doing. And as far as
let me stop you there, because that seems to be those who are complaining that they don't have a say. They would classify themselves as normal everyday Texans because they don't have those deep pockets to, what they say, buying their way into influencing how this project goes. They believe they ought to have a say just by virtue of the fact that they are Texas citizens. Respond to that.
Well, the Alamo belongs to all Texans. Clearly, the Alamo belongs to all Texans. And we've been taking input throughout this process. We've had 10 public meetings as a component of 93 meetings overall that we've had with stakeholders and various folks around Texas. We've been open about this process the entire time. And I'm sorry for these folks that some of them just now started to pay attention. That's not really on us, because we've had public meetings about this and we have been open about this. And we have from the beginning, we announced from the beginning what we were doing. We announced from the beginning that we had the Alamo Endowment Board, that we were reconstituting, that we were bringing folks in. And when you want to do a capital fundraising campaign, which is different actually from the day-to-day management of the Alamo, when you want to do a capital fundraising campaign of the magnitude we're talking about, you're going to consult people who have done these kind of campaigns successfully before. That's who's on the Alamo Endowment Board. We actually have a Citizens Advisory Council that is made up of regular folks, and they meet periodically and they talk too. And we do listen to the public input and debate. For instance, over the glass walls, that was a very early concept back in April that was put out there. Folks didn't like it, and we listened and responded, and that went away. So this whole notion that we're not being open, that we're not listening to people, it just doesn't stand up to the fact.
Yeah, and on that glass wall concept, is it true also that the commissioner himself hated the concept of that glass wall in front of the Alamo?
I think it's fair to say he was not a fan. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Bryan Preston, folks, with the General Land Office. He is the communications director for George P. Bush, who is the land commissioner in the state of Texas, and overseeing this project of renovation of the Alamo, one of the more recognizable names around not only the state of Texas, but also around the country and around the world. Everybody remembers the Alamo.
That's right.
Let's talk about what the final vision will look like. Is this in stone as you and I are speaking right now? Is the final version been implemented, or is there still room for change?
There's still lots of room for change, Chris. The only thing that is set now are the 5 key concepts that are going to guide us through the rest of this project. And those key concepts get at restoring and repairing and preserving the church, getting the battlefield from the streets, recapturing it from the streets that cross it now, getting the traffic off of that, getting the snow cone vendors and all off of that, creating this museum for the Phil Collins collection to house and preserve and display and protect it, and creating a sense of arrival when you get to the Alamo, which is missing right now. Those concepts are set, but how you reach those concepts are not set at all. We haven't even hired a design firm yet to come in and start making recommendations for how we will delineate the 1836 footprint once it's recaptured. So a lot of folks are in a panic right now about this project, and they really shouldn't be, because we're in the early stages. Nothing physical is set in stone. It's just the ideas, and the ideas I think every Texan should support.
Yeah, you mentioned the predecessor to George P. Bush, and I just give me a generic answer, if you will, about how much of this, from what you're getting the feedback from the general public, is actual legitimate concern over a treasured Texas icon. How much of this is politics? If you're going to put a percentage, how much genuine concern, how much politics?
An excellent question, and it's hard to quantify that in percentage terms. What I'll say is people's concern is legitimate and should be, because the Alamo is the heart of Texas. But the origins of this are political, and the origins of this are cynically political, and frankly, they would sacrifice the preservation of the Alamo for the sake of some political hit or point that our predecessor is trying to make. And frankly, as a Texan, as a 5th-generation Texan and a veteran, that disgusts me.
Yeah. Well, and without getting, there's a lot of folks that are going to be watching this. I've never even been to Texas, much less the Alamo. There is one sticking point, or maybe on the radio show, I was contacted by somebody who pointed out there was a federal building directly across from existing right now, right across from the Alamo. And it was recommended that big, beautiful, paid for building be utilized for the proposed museum. Is that up for discussion?
Yeah, it's a great idea. And actually, we've been pursuing that idea for more than 2 years. But Chris, have you ever walked into a federal building of any kind and made them an offer to buy that building? It just doesn't really work that way. We bought the 3 buildings across the street because they were for sale and we got a good deal on them. The federal building, however, was recently renovated to the tune of several $1 million.
Yeah.
It's not just a post office, as some people say. There's a federal courthouse in that building. So the feds would have to find another place to house that courthouse. And there are 3-letter agencies in that building. Okay. Do you know what I'm getting at there?
Right.
They're not the kind of agencies you could walk in and say, we would like to make you an offer and buy your facility. So, I mean, I've heard Ray Myers, one of our critics, say this, and it's frankly a childish thing to say, as if we didn't think of this. Of course we thought of this. we have reached out to the congressional delegation multiple times. We've had multiple meetings and phone encounters with them. We have gotten them on board, and it's in a bipartisan way. Our senators are on board. The bulk of our congressional delegation is on board. People like Culberson and Doggett have been involved in this because that's actually in Doggett's district. And yet you're dealing with the federal government. You're dealing with GSA. And in particular, when you were dealing with the Obama administration, how receptive do Texans think they were when we went to them and said, we would like to help you, for you to help us remember the Alamo?
Yeah, no, I completely concur. Last thing, this actually got a little bit of national publicity, was that cenotaph, which was commissioned. It's an empty tomb that sits on a plot of land owned by the city of San Antonio, but there's differing take on who paid for the statue and the legality of moving that to an adjacent park where the Alamo defenders were burned. The detractors of the project overall say they don't want that cenotaph moved 1 inch. Who at the end, I know you and I have talked off the air. Whose call is this ultimately, really?
Right now, it's ultimately the city's call because it's city property. It sits on the plaza, which is city property. The cenotaph itself was funded. Here's how the funding worked. In the 1930s, in 1936, they had a centennial celebration for the 100th anniversary of Texas and the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Alamo. So the state of Texas sought funding from the Works Progress Administration, which was a creature of the Roosevelt era, the Depression era, to fund some projects around the Alamo. Part of that funding went to paying for the cenotaph. It was $100,000 in 1937 dollars by the time everything happened. It took them 2 years to build, and they commissioned it in 1940. When they commissioned it in 1940, it was commissioned on city property and was dedicated to the city of San Antonio. That makes them the owners. And there has been some litigation, I think, back and forth over the years, but the city ultimately owns the cenotaph. And so they have the final say. Now, they wouldn't be alone in this because the Texas Historical Commission, from what I understand, would have to get involved too because it is considered a historical landmark.
Well, it would also, sooner or later, it's going to have to be adjudicated. Is there an effort by the General Land Office to actually get this decided now, sooner rather than later, so all doubt can be removed?
Well, we're in discussions with the city about everything. We're in discussions right now. The main thing we're discussing is actually the fate of the plaza and the street.
Okay.
The street needs to be closed down right away because the street is causing physical harm to the Alamo. And I want these folks out there who are making noise about all this to understand you're harming the Alamo when you are standing in the way of what is the best chance we've had to preserve the Alamo in a century and the best chance to reattach this battlefield to the Alamo in a century. So that's the priority right now. The cenotaph, of course, is part of those discussions as well.
Yeah, I know you guys have a website. You are directing folks who are of interest not only in the state of Texas, but also around the nation. Where can they go?
SaveTheAlamo.com.
SaveTheAlamo.com. Bryan Preston, everybody. He's with the General Land Office under he's the communications director for George P. Bush, who was the land commissioner in the great state of Texas. Sir, appreciate the time here on the Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide.
Chris, my friend, always happy to come chat with you, and thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
You bet. And that's just about going to do it here on the Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide for this evening. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can either leave an email at chrissalcedo.com or a voicemail at chrissalcedo.com. Instantaneous feedback always available for you at Chris Salcedo TX, at ChrisSalcedoTX. Hope you have a great night. Back here tomorrow on the Vida Television Network for the Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide. We'll see you then.